Hello, everyone. To those just tuning in, welcome. To those who've been checking out sessions throughout the day, welcome back. We hope you're enjoying the content and looking forward to more awesome presentations coming up. A big thank you to our partners and speakers for helping us deliver a fantastic program. A quick reminder to join our Slack channel to interact with other attendees and join selected speakers for Q&A. You can find the link in the menu at the top of this page. Happy viewing.
Hello, everyone. Emma said that Long Beach is a pretty fun place. I like to think so, but that doesn't mean I participate in fun events, except this one. So I'm David Lee Kim. I've been at HubSpot for about 4 years, going on 5, and started off in marketing, now in product. So to get a show of hands, who here is on the marketing team? And who here is on a product team? Okay, it's a good mix. Well, the one thing is that one person who said they want to learn growth tactics is going to be disappointed because that's the complete opposite of what I'm going to talk about today. But we're going to talk about growth strategy, which will dictate those tactics. And I'll tell you why that's important in a little bit. Now, before we go in, I want you to imagine this. You're looking at some chart. It might be traffic. It might be leads you're generating. It might be the number of free users you're getting to your product. But whatever it is, it's something that you want to be going that way, up and to the right. But it's more looking like it's flat, and you're wondering, okay, what's happening here? I need to do something, I need to change something, or 1, I might get fired. 2, my company's not gonna succeed. So you're thinking, well, I read some blog posts that said I need to run some experiments. So I'm not sure if you can read it from back there, but this is a Google search for growth experiments where you'll get multiple blog posts of all the different experiments you should be running on your website, on your product, and you're thinking, you gotta start somewhere. And so you think, okay, well, there's this button on my website. I want people to sign up. What if I just made that red? And you don't really know what to expect, but you do know that you need to start testing some things, changing some things on your website. And you run it for a couple weeks, and a couple weeks later, your graph still looks like this. So something's going on. If this continues, it's not going to look very good. And so you're thinking, a lot of those blog posts will say, well, 90% of what I do is going to fail, so I need to keep running experiments, right? So you keep running experiments, still nothing really changes. You're still getting that same chart week after week, and it's been a couple of months at this point. You're starting to wonder, well, maybe these experiments are the wrong experiments. Maybe I'm running this wrong. Maybe I need to ask someone else for help, or maybe I need to hire a consultant. Really, you need to start asking, like, what's happening here? And the reason why this is generally what happens when people start getting into experimentation is people tend to focus on the tactics and solutions before really understanding what the problem is. So if you think to that button color change, what are they trying to solve by changing that button color? It's because people probably aren't converting on the website. So they're thinking maybe changing a button color would solve that. But if you pull it all the way back to that problem of saying people are not converting on a website, that opens up a bunch of different things you could be trying out to improve that conversion rate. So the thing is, we always need to start with problems. So some examples, and this is going to be extremely simple, but it's easy to forget about starting from here, is an example is you get a lot of traffic, but no one's actually signing up or no one's becoming a lead. You might get people who sign up for your product, but they never end up using it. You might get people that will actually use your product, but they don't pay you. You might get leads that get on calls with you, but they don't pay you. And so when you start with these problems, that opens up a world of different solutions that you can use to tackle these problems. Now at HubSpot, one of the biggest changes we made was going from a heavily marketing and sales business to a freemium business, where it required a lot of partnership between marketing and product. And this presentation is going to make it seem easy. It was actually very difficult, and it requires a lot of communication and a lot of people just willing to collaborate. And I'll share a little bit about how we collaborated. So today we're going to go through why we run experiments, our obsession over documentation and how that actually helps with communication, that process of experimentation, and we're going to talk about some real experiments that we ran. And experiments are a tool that help us understand how to move a metric. And I specifically say it's a tool because it's one of many tools in our toolkit to determine how to make business decisions, right? You might be looking just at data and decide that you want to make a decision off of that. You might say this data is kind of not easy to trust because you're not sure what the source is, or there might be seasonality. So you might want to run an experiment to prove that, yes, this is the right decision to make. So think of experiments not as your only solution, but as one of many. Now, the challenge here with growth tactics is that anyone can do a tactic, right? So if you think about any sort of tactic, they go through this life cycle where someone discovers it, everyone starts doing it, and it stops working. So an example here is, think about email marketing. Back in the early 2000s, email marketing was probably getting 60, 70% open rates. But now you're getting huge email inboxes with 10,000 unread emails. No one really wants to open your emails anymore. You get lucky if you get a 20% open rate. If you think about pop-up forms, for instance, I don't know how long you've been in marketing, but back when pop-up forms first started, they were hailed as having a 70% conversion rate. But now, I don't know about you all, but the moment I see a pop-up starting to appear, I look for that X button immediately. And then some websites even resort to cheap tactics where they hide the X button and make it white on a white background. So these are silly tactics that are like not gonna actually help you, and it provides a bad user experience. So how do you avoid this life cycle of growth tactics and instead do things that help your users? Now, that's the difference between experimentation and experimentation that works. It's having a process and strategy for why you're doing those experiments in the first place. So Tal Raviv from Patreon has said, without the scientific method, we would just be growth hacking. We'd just be trying a bunch of random things from loud blogs, but not truly understanding our users. So back to that first example of changing a button color, what makes us think our user is going to click a red button versus a green button? There's nothing that we're learning there. So to avoid growth hacking, at HubSpot, we focus very strongly on documentation. That's how we create this really, really fine filter for high quality experiments. As you start running experiments, you're going to make mistakes. We made a ton. You're going to run a lot of things that don't work. You're going to have a few experiments that actually work. But there's going to be a certain point where you say, hey, we ran something like this 6 months ago, didn't work. What makes you think it's worth running this time? So you can continue filtering out things that might not work and focus on the things that could. So this is an example of documentation that we've actually done at HubSpot. We will actually walk through this experiment later on, but you can see that it started off with a hypothesis, all the designs that we did. It goes into the learnings and results, and all the follow-up that we did as well. So in that document, we go through every single one of these items. So there's a hypothesis, objective statement, experiment design, predicted outcome of each idea, success and how we define that, analysis of the experiment, learnings, and so on. And don't worry about taking photos for all this. There's actually going to be a URL at the end that will give you access to all of this. But if you'd like to take photos, please do, because I like these slides a lot. So every experiment should start with a hypothesis. And the mistake that folks tend to make with a hypothesis is they say it's a prediction instead. So they say, if I do X, then Y will happen. But that's a prediction. Hypothesis is just a statement of what you believe to be true about your users, your customers, whoever you're thinking about. So don't mistaken prediction with hypothesis. This is an example. So one of the experiments we actually had a hypothesis around was that we believe people are overwhelmed by all the questions in our sign-up flow. If you've ever gone through HubSpot sign-up flow in the last couple of years, we ask a lot of questions. There are at least 8 screens that you have to go through to make a free account. And we realized like we should probably change something about that. And then once you have the hypothesis, slides are going ahead. Once you have the hypothesis, that is what allows you to start brainstorming ideas around that. And once you have those ideas, you can make predictions based off what you think those ideas would result in. So an example is if our hypothesis is true, then if we show social proof on the sign-up flow, that might make people feel more comfortable and finish the sign-up process. So this, again, it started off with the problem that we think the sign-up flow is too long, people are not finishing it, we think our users are overwhelmed by all that. What can we actually do? The solution is maybe social proof. So that's an idea, and we finally worked our way down to a solution to think about. So this is actually what the sign-up flow currently looks like, but I just want to give an example of how we could brainstorm if you're thinking about improving the conversion rate. So here, someone started off at the homepage at HubSpot. They click to get started, and they learn about our products. They decide to sign up, where that first screen is giving their name, email, password, pretty normal. And then we ask for information about their website, and we ask for some more information about their role, and finally, they get into their product. Now, when we're brainstorming about this and we're thinking, hey, these are too many screens, what can we do to improve this? We're thinking, okay, if they're overwhelmed, maybe we can combine the first 2 steps so that it feels like there are fewer steps and there's less effort. Or what if we just removed a step? What if we can ask this question later on? Or what if we just show social proof? And this is going to be the example that we're going to focus on throughout this talk. Not sure if this is working. All right. So taking a few steps back to when you have your hypothesis and start brainstorming ideas, you want to map those in terms of impact and effort. So if anyone's thought about or used a pie framework to think about prioritizing their ideas, it's very similar. You think about how much impact do you think this solution or this experiment could have on your metrics? And this is a very squishy concept. It's really hard to predict what's actually going to happen, but it makes you start reasoning why you think it'll be impactful and actually have a strong argument for it. And then for effort, you're thinking both technically and also when you run an experiment, you might affect other teams. You might decrease the number of leads potentially, or you might increase it a lot. And you might want to tell the sales team, hey, you should expect a decrease or an increase. We don't know yet, but how many teams do you need to talk to let them know, hey, this is going to happen as well? And then we love 2x2 matrices. So we have this chart where the line doesn't show up there. But imagine there's a horizontal line. And in terms of things that are high effort, low impact, potentially, just don't do it. Don't waste your time on that. There are things that are low effort, low impact, which you maybe just do it. There are things that are high impact and high effort, which are going to be the really big things that you want to tackle. An example of this is redesigning your homepage, for instance. You might realize it's old, no one's touched it in a while, no one's tested anything on it. Maybe you should make time to actually do that and go through the process of redesigning it. And then things that are low effort and high impact, you should just do. So what we'd like to do is we'll get a whiteboard, we'll draw out this 2x2 matrix, and then we'll have ideas on stickies. And we'll pull up a sticky note. It might be a room of 4 or 5 people and say, okay, is this low impact or high impact potentially? Is this high effort or low effort? And we'll put it up. And then by the end of the session, we'll have some quadrants that are more full than others. And then we might start double clicking on some and saying, is this actually low effort or is it high effort? And should we revisit this or do we actually think it's here? Should we dig into this further? And then once you decide to move forward with one of your ideas for an experiment, this is one of the most straightforward things, but having an objective statement is super important. And it's just stating what you want to accomplish with the experiment. Some people might say, hey, isn't that kind of useless or redundant? But the thing is, once you start having a meeting where you're discussing details and very granular things or implementation, and I'm sure everyone in the room has been in one of these meetings, you might realize that everyone's completely lost sight of the goal of the meeting or the experiment, and no one knows what to say because you don't want to be that asshole that says, hey, I think you're talking about something completely unrelated. So when you have an objective statement stated, you can actually say, hey, if our goal is to do X, is to improve signups, does talking about this really specific thing actually help? Like, let's take a couple steps back and refocus on what we're trying to achieve here. And then generally when someone does that, and we do that often at HubSpot, everyone says, oh yeah, thanks, let's talk about this other thing later. And an example is, it's happening again. An example of our objective statement was that we wanted to increase signups, right? So once we move forward, we decide, okay, if we want to do this, let's start designing the experiment. And the goal of this is to make sure that, one, we get all the data that we want and enough of it. We know what variants we're going to test. And whether or not those variants will answer the questions we have about our users. So this is an exhaustive list, is not an exhaustive list, but experiment design includes how many variants you'll test. So maybe you want to test 3 or 4, which means it'll take longer than an A/B test. You might want to actually talk about what the variants and designs look like. You want to know how many samples you need, and that will define how long you'll have to run the experiment for. So this is an example of what the signup used to look like before we tested it out. That's the control. Very simple design, just a sign-up form. And we said we want to put social proof on it. So from there, we had 3 different variations we wanted to test. The one on the far left is a testimonial from Shopify. The middle one shows a bunch of logos of companies we thought would be recognizable by companies around the world. And the one on the right was a bunch of awards that we've won. And we'll talk about which one of those won later on. So these are fake numbers, but we decided to run the experiment for 14 days and get at least 20,000 views to see if that got us to statistical significance. And then once you have the idea and you've talked through it and the potential design, you want to talk about predicted outcome. So this is the if-then statement. And you can start as simple as, we predict that the completion rate will improve by 5 percentage points. At HubSpot, and we encourage other companies to do this as much as possible, we map it all the way down to revenue. So we'll say if it increases by 5 percentage points, that will translate to 500 or 300 new signups per week. And assuming that the upgrade rate is 10%, average sales price is $20, that results in $600 in more revenue per month. So it's tough if you're a smaller company to map out this funnel, but if you do, it helps you really decide whether or not an experiment is worth running. And sure, some people might change those numbers a little bit to start arguing that something's worth running when it isn't, but that's why later on we'll go into a peer review, which I'll talk about, which is right here. So the peer review is a meeting with your immediate team that's talking about running an experiment and maybe a few other stakeholders involved, and you'll talk through all those different items we walk through in that document. And this is when people can just tear it apart. So people will ask, what makes you think this is true about our users? Why is this your hypothesis? Do you have data to back that up? And they'll say, maybe your design should be different. Have you considered these different designs? I can help you with that. Or they'll ask, is this even the right thing to focus on? So when it gets to the peer review, there's still an opportunity to say, this experiment is not worth running, which has actually happened. And it's kind of heartbreaking because you've put a lot of time into researching it, pulling data, designing everything. And then if someone just catches one thing you missed that completely nullifies your experiment idea, you kind of have to start from the beginning. And in some cases, you might realize that your hypothesis is actually something else, or that there's a different way to test the hypothesis, and then you have different ideas. But the peer review is what helps us have a really fine filter for running experiments. It's when you kind of have an open room and just discuss very candidly whether or not something is worth moving forward with. Because if you run experiments, that means, say, for example, if you run an experiment on a homepage, which is very valuable real estate, that means you can't do anything else on that homepage for the time that experiment's running, which means it's a very valuable thing to do. Now, once you do the peer review, hopefully you get through it, you start running the experiment, whether it be for a week or 2 weeks. For us, we generally run it for at least 2 weeks because we want to consider that there might be fluctuations in traffic samples. So if we run it just on half a Wednesday, we don't want to just run it to the next Wednesday. Instead, we want a full 2 weeks just to make sure in case it's a really strange week and there's a holiday or something like that. And then we have the postmortem. So after the person who owns the experiment has done all the write-ups, done all the analysis, and shared what they learned, we have another meeting with the immediate team, and we talk about, why did this experiment end up the way it did? Why was our hypothesis or prediction right or wrong? Why do we think it succeeded or failed? And what are the follow-ups? So let's talk about one of the experiments we actually ran. At this point, we've walked through actually an entire experiment doc of what we did for the social proof experiment. Our hypothesis was that people were overwhelmed by our questions. We had this objective of increasing the number of people signing up for our products. And then we decided that we wanted to show social proof of all the ideas that we had. And we had a prediction of what we thought the outcome would be. So again, this was the control. We had 3 variants. And of these 3 variants, I want to see a vote of which one you thought worked the best. So we have testimonials, we have logos, and we have awards. Who thought testimonials won? Okay, like 5 hands. Who thought the logos won? Okay, and who thought the awards won? Who thinks the control won? All right, it seemed like a tie between the logos and the awards. So results, data was inconclusive. It actually looked like the control, which had nothing on it, won. And as a marketer, as someone with a marketing background, I thought, well, that's kind of weird because social proof is supposed to be one of the strongest things in psychology that influence people to make decisions. So what happened here that made it that maybe it was the way we set it up, maybe it was the social proof that we showed, but we were really confused by these results and we kind of had to go back to the drawing board. But we wrote up our learnings and we just said, okay, social proof in the way that we set up this experiment didn't work. We should probably think about how social proof works in different regions. Maybe if we look at all global traffic, there may have been a net zero improvement, but maybe in different regions, social proof works differently. And then we also asked, maybe there's something else we should be focused on. Maybe it's not worth exploring this further. So next steps, we start all the way back to our problem of, okay, people are not completing a sign-up flow. Why is that? We did some digging, not just from a marketing standpoint, but from a tech standpoint, from a positioning standpoint as well. And we learned a couple things that were very disappointing. We learned that the sign-up app took 5 to 10 seconds to load because of tech debt. No one had touched it in years. We learned that the sign-up app was a legacy product that was built by 2 different teams, which meant they had 2 different backends that didn't talk to each other. So in some cases, that second part didn't even load, so people could not finish it even if they wanted to. And we also realized, like, wait, that design does not match the website. If someone goes from their website, clicks sign up, and sees a completely different sign up page, it's really confusing. You wonder if you're like getting redirected to a weird page that's trying to hack you or something. So we thought, okay, let's start over, let's rewrite this document and run a different experiment. And this was a larger design experiment here. It wasn't just adding some social proof, it was actually a very broad change to the sign-up flow. So our hypothesis then was that people are getting fatigued when you're signing up. There's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of steps and it takes so long to load, so people don't want to wait. And our objective is still to improve signups. This time it's to understand if improving load time and making it look better will improve conversions. And then the prediction was, yeah, if we improve load time, of course, more people are going to sign up because the app's actually going to work. And we had this expected outcome of some sort of revenue. So this is what the sign-up used to look like. Very minimal, as some people would like to say. And this was what the new version looked like. So this is what the control performed at. About 34.4% of people completed the sign-up flow. Would anyone like to predict around how much the variant performed at? 100%, 80%, 50%? 20? You thought it did worse? So we saw a 39% completion rate, so it was about a 5 percentage point improvement. And considering how much traffic the HubSpot website gets and our sign-up flow gets, just a huge improvement for us. So we productized it, we rolled out the new sign-up flow across all our different products, and we saw some good results there. Now, the learning that we still had to write down, even though it was obvious, was that reducing the load speed, adding visuals, reducing the friction there, resulted in more people signing up. Now, earlier I talked about how we have a fine filter for running experiments, and we are always working to improve our experimentation process. I started off with a failed experiment, and people don't really like talking about failures, but by focusing on what didn't work, you continue to learn and figure out what does work in the future. And at HubSpot, we like to avoid this thing called success theater, where all people talk about are things that work, which makes it seem like everything's working. And people feel shitty when things don't work, when that's the reality. Like, most things won't work. And so by having these discussions of things that don't work, that allows people to feel more comfortable pitching new ideas in the future as well. And then the thing that I want to kind of drill into here is, in growth, it's not just about winning or losing or succeeding or failing. It's always a focus on either you're winning or you're learning, and you learn and you learn and learn, and you keep trying new experiments until you win. And there's this weird expectation in growth and marketing a product that you just have to keep trying a bunch of different things and like not thinking about it. You just have to move on to the next thing, when really you kind of need to slow down to go faster. And so if you reflect on what you're working on and continue thinking about why things succeed or why things failed, continue to learn, and then that means you continue to grow. So thank you and good luck. If you'd like the full essay and resources, you can go to davidleekim.com/growth. Thanks. And I think do we have time for questions?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
And if you haven't had a chance to enter any questions, slido.com, and you can upvote those so David gets the hottest questions first.
All right, so this first question: do you use customer or prospect interviews to hypothesize, or just trust your gut with common sense and speculation? You do not ever just trust your gut with common sense and speculation. If you do have some common sense and some speculation, you should definitely do some prospect or customer interviews and or pull data that will help you answer whether or not your common sense, your gut feeling is right or wrong. What we generally do is the hypothesis comes from the interviews themselves or comes from the data. So we try to collect qualitative and quantitative data before having a hypothesis. It's not really just having a hypothesis in a vacuum. And how do you stop the high impact and effort exercises being categorized as nice to have instead of making time to do it by upper management? So this is a case of kind of stakeholder management and managing up and kind of making a case for things. And because HubSpot's kind of almost 4,000 people now, there's a lot of pitch decks being made. And the way to convince them that something's worth doing is by using data and storytelling. So this goes very heavily into the marketing and product side, where you're thinking, what's the goal that upper management has? How does this experiment or thing that I'm pitching them that is really big and going to take a couple months to do, going to help them reach their goal? Pull data that hopefully supports what you're hoping to pitch, tell a story, and start socializing that idea with different teams and different other teams that might be involved. So this is kind of a point where it's navigating the office and the different hierarchies as well. How long did the first experiment take from idea to finish, and how long the second iteration? The first experiment was pretty quick. It probably took a week to get all designs and documentation, and then we ran it for 2 weeks. That second one, because it was an entire redesign, took about 2 months because we were changing the entire sign-up flow. We wanted to be a bit more careful with how we rolled it out. And we actually rolled it out to 10% of people before rolling it out to the entire everyone who saw the sign-up flow. So we were very careful about that one. Why did you try social proof first over form UX improvements? So that was an internal thing. All those form fields were required by our business operations team to actually provide to our sales team so that they had the information they needed for their calls. So that was an internal thing. We figured that social proof was a really safe thing to try to get people more comfortable with changing the sign-up flow. So this is also another piece of getting the company, different teams comfortable with us changing this really valuable piece of real estate. And then how did you A/B test the tech department? Did you keep the older version of the code in a product chain to test it? Yeah, so we have a homegrown experimentation platform. Other people might use Optimizely or other tools, but we do have older versions of the code. We have it split 50-50, so half the people see the old version, half people see the new version, and if we decide not to productize it, we'll just revert it back to 100% of people seeing the old version. I think we have time for one more. So how big is a typical team working on these experiments prior to peer review? How would you change the setup to apply to smaller companies? So a typical team at HubSpot is one product manager, a researcher, an engineer, and a designer. Typically, if you're at a smaller company and may not have all those resources, you might just be a product manager and an engineer, and you might just be hacking up designs. Personally, I think that's okay. I come from a small company background, and I like moving much faster. Depends on how your company works, what you're comfortable with. But really, if you can come up with, also, if you're a smaller company, I'd ask whether or not you have enough traffic to start running experiments, or if you should just be kind of going with a bit more gut, which would be focused less on quantitative data and more interviews and qualitative data. And then if you're a smaller company, just focus on whether or not you have the right hypothesis and how many experiments you can actually run, and then start from there. If you're a smaller company, might be the case that you can only run one experiment every month or two, and that's okay too. But the point is that you start testing. I think we're good. All right, thanks everyone.